Here we are, we're recording, yay. My name is Audrey Hudgens, Dr. Audrey Hudgens, but you can call me Audrey, Dr. Hudgens, Dr. Audrey, just don't call me late for dinner. So I'm a clinical professor in the College of Arts and Sciences. My offices are physically located, or my office, I only have one, in Matteo Ricci Institute on the first floor on the left-hand side of the Casey building. But I primarily teach for international studies and political science. I've been at the university for almost 20 years, and I love teaching, and I love engaging with students around issues that are important in the world. And one of them is migration justice. So you're watching this video maybe because you're interested in the migration justice immersion that takes place from Seattle University to a place called Nogales, Sonora, Mexico. And so I'm going to share my screen and talk you through what it is we're thinking about doing. And so what you should see there on the screen is what we're doing. And so do you see on your screen a picture of me with a dog and a woman named Ladry?
Yes.
Super. Okay, so what you see there is a picture of me with a dog named Lacey and a young woman from Venezuela named Ladry. And the dog is not mine. The dog is a friend of mine's that I was caring for. And Ladry she's still alive, is a recipient of the services of Kino Border Initiative, which is the organization that we're primarily partnered with for this immersion opportunity. Ladry and I met at Kino, but we didn't know we met. You know, we were in the space at the same time. She had fled political persecution in Venezuela, had spent about a year and a half in Argentina, hoping to settle there, and then ended up experiencing more persecution, racism, and discrimination, and decided to displace again to the United States. She passed through a number of countries to get to the United States, and passed through the Kino Border Initiative, where she received services before passing through into the United States. If she couldn't have done that, she might have actually settled in Mexico, but we would have never gotten the opportunity to meet. Like I said, I was volunteering there when she was passing through. I'm a long-term volunteer at Kino Border Initiative. I spend a month or two there every year working with this organization that I believe very strongly in and does very good work. We'll learn a little bit about that later. But she passed through and went into detention, because at the time, this was in 2019, 2020, every migrant that was seeking asylum in the United States went into detention, or most migrants, and she was traveling by herself. And so she spent 8 months in detention in Arizona, fighting her case on her own without legal support. And when she was successful, she was coming out of detention, and an undocumented cousin who had said that she would sponsor her, ghosted her, and she had nowhere to go. So Kino reached out to like-minded folks who might be in a position to provide respite, and I answered the call. And so Ladry lived with me for a year and a month back between 2020 and 2021 at the height of the pandemic. And we came to be very close. She still lives in the area. She's now living in Everett with her boyfriend and her boyfriend's family, and has a job and a car and all those things. We got together last weekend and went kayaking together. And she's building a life for herself in her new home. Did she want to leave her country? No, but she ended up here and is making her way. And so I wanted to ask a question about the quote that you see here. You don't go to the margins to make a difference. You go to the margins so that folks at the margins can make you different. And if you've heard of Homeboy Industries in LA, then you might be familiar with Greg Boyle and a number of books that he's written about his experience working with gangs, many of whom are from other countries in LA. And so I'm curious if either one of you could offer your perspective on who this quote is speaking to.
I feel like everyone could interpret it in a different way and take something from the quote. So I feel like anyone who wants to listen to it, yeah.
Yes, I think it can speak to a number of different audiences. For me, I feel like what's happening is it's speaking primarily to people of privilege, right? Because they don't, the quote is oriented from the perspective of you're not on the margin. You're going to go to the margin. And then when you do that, the people on the margin are going to make you different. It doesn't necessarily sound like it's speaking from the perspective of someone who is at the margins. And so I offer this quote for us to think about not only the audience that we're talking to when we're thinking about different perspectives on the world, but also that our positionality is very often quite different from those of whom we are encountering, particularly those who have experiences of forced displacement. We are very similar in that we are both humans who want to live a dignified and fulfilled life, but we have things that perhaps have gotten in the way and created obstacles for ourselves for standing in the way of that success. And so I'm gonna take us to what you should see now is a slide that says migration overview. Is that right? And you see a picture of a passport.
Yeah.
Here we are. And so one thing, not everybody has a US passport, but when you do have a US passport, it offers you a tremendous amount of privilege. And your country of birth, regardless of whether it's the United States or not, can offer you a tremendous amount of lifelong privileges. And in this way, from the US perspective, we are offered tremendous economic opportunity. We are offered safety and political stability. So if we're in a country that is experiencing some form of conflict, we can actually turn to our embassies. And in some cases, our embassies will help us evacuate from conflict-ridden zones. We can also travel just about anywhere in the world on that passport. Very often we don't need a visa. And so there are a tremendous number of problems here in the United States, right? There's racism, prejudice, discrimination, economic inequality, challenges with climate change, with depending upon your ideological perspective, the health, safety and security of our institutions. But what many of us have is no shortage of privilege. And it's something that we don't often think about. And so this little blue book in the form of a US passport creates nearly limitless opportunities for mobility. And that mobility looks like what you see here on this screen. There, particularly in the context of the Americas, there is no shortage of places that you can go. So migration is the idea that it is a natural human process that is only impeded by the nation state. And so what do we mean by that? We mean that there are lots of walls, there are lots of visa requirements, traffickers and criminal organizations. We have a preference for detention in the United States. Until very recently, we had Title 42, which was preventing or limiting the ability to seek asylum in the United States. There's even a transit ban that says that if you've passed through another country before you've come to the United States, you can't seek asylum. And so there's a lot that could be said for the privilege that not everybody has. And for many people, that notion of migration justice is a faraway dream. And so going back to Ladra's example, she passed through 3 countries, walking, by plane, and by boat. If you travel from southern or northern Mexico to the United States, you would have to, particularly from southern to northern Mexico, pass through about 8 states on a train, a bus, or a plane. But Nogales, Arizona, and Nogales, Sonora are literally just steps away from each other. One country, you can drive or walk, 1 or 2 steps, you can move from one country to another. But what makes that journey remarkable is all of the things that are in the way of us being able to take that step. from the wall to the visa requirements to the passport that we have to have in our hands to the privilege that enables us to be able to take that step from one country to another. And so if we viewed our policies in terms of migration as a human right, how would our policies look different than they do today? They might look very, very different. And so this immersion is focused on the idea of community development. And so what that means is that we have a community that has taken a step towards coming together to address a problem collectively. And so I'm wondering if, Pao Meng, you would be willing to share something in your community that a group of people have come together and tried to solve. Is there a problem that you can think of in your community that people came together to try to fix? I can think of a problem in my community. We had a set of stairs close to where we live that were falling apart. And many people were traversing these stairs every day. And it just seemed like it would be a matter of time before somebody was going to get hurt. And so the group of people in our community came together on a particular day and fixed the stairs so that everybody could use them. And so that's a group, that's an example of what we mean by community development, where people are coming together to take a collective action on what's been identified as a common issue or problem. And so in this case, the premise of this immersion is, what is the response of people in Nogales, Mexico and Nogales, Arizona to the migration that is happening in their community? And there is a tremendous amount of it. And so what you see on this slide is some information about Nogales. Up in the upper sort of middle of the slide, what you see is where Nogales is on a map in relation to both the United States and Mexico. And so it's a border town in every sense of the word, and it is at ground zero in the context of this immersion. And so what you see on the right-hand side with the Mexico map is all of the routes that a lot of folks take when they are traveling north to the border. But what we have is we have in both countries a tremendous amount of militarization and securitization. And that's one of the things that we will explore in the course. Nogales was and is a magnet for migration. And it's a major port of entry next to the Sonoran Desert, one of the most deadliest deserts in the United States. This increasing militarization and securitization began in the 1990s through a program called Prevention Through Deterrence. And that was when, in the 1990s, that we started to build border walls. And those walls in this area started to funnel people into the desert. And this is also in the period of time when Border Patrol began to expand. It wasn't that big in the 1990s. Thousands have died. Since 1998, at least 8,000 undocumented migrants have attempted or died attempting to cross the border from Mexico to the U.S. Many thousands more are deported if they're caught. Very few are given the chance to pursue an asylum claim. Now you see in the bottom left this chart that shows you cyclical outcomes or encounters. Cyclical flows over time. And so this chart begins in the year 2000 and then charts all the way up to January of 2022. And so what you can see here is that there's been there was a cyclical flow in place from the year 2000, generally declining until about January of 2012 or 2013. And that was when things started to become a little less cyclical and start to increase a tremendous amount. In the last 6 years, we've seen a tremendous difference in flows. And a lot of this is tied to US policy changes. You can think about the election of Barack Obama. You can think about the election of Donald Trump. You can think about the election of President Biden. And those dates will coincide with differences in flows. But and each one of those presidents created pretty significant policy changes that had an effect. You can see the effect of the pandemic in 2020. And you also might consider the natural and man-made challenges that were faced by a number of people as they were trying to just simply choose to live a better life, even in the wake of forced displacement. And so there's a tremendous amount of acute needs that are addressed by Keno Border Initiative and others along the border that take a step towards community development. And so we're going in depth in our look at Keno Border Initiative as one way in which the community has risen to the challenge of this increased flows of migrants. And so Keno Border Initiative is a Jesuit Catholic organization. It's a binational organization that's been around since 2008. And so right as these flows started to increase, this was when a group of people in Nogales, Mexico and Nogales, Arizona came together to try to address issues of migration that were happening in their community. And what has resulted is this pretty significant, beautiful binational organization called Keno Border Initiative that is focused on migration justice. And they do that in 3 different ways. They provide the basic humanitarian assistance and holistic accompany of migrants that we would expect an organization that is focused on migration justice to provide. And so that looks like meals and support with locating housing, get the clothing and the healthcare necessary to be able to recover from the journey that they may have been on, and also prepare them for the next point in their journey. But they also do Mexico and US policy advocacy on both sides of the border. They're trying to address the injustices that exist for migrants of any stripe. And then finally, they offer education and encounter. And that's where we come in. We're being invited by the organization to learn about migration and migration justice, and perhaps develop some solidarity with the migrant experience. And so what you see here are some, on the left-hand side, photos of the last immersion. And so in the upper left, it's a picture of the building itself, what's called the Comedor. And that's where all of the services are delivered. To the left, you see some art that is in front of the border between Nogales. This is on the Mexican side. And so there's pieces of art and advocacy all along the border that we go to see. And then there's, I don't know who that is in the bottom left. I can't really tell, but that's right at the border where we cross. And so we spend time crossing into Mexico. We stay in the United States on this immersion, but we cross into Mexico and we have the experience of passing back and forth across the border. And then the picture that looks like a bunch of folks outside, that is one of the activities on the immersion, and that's a walk in the desert. So what is it like to walk in the Sonoran Desert, one of the deadliest deserts in the United States, which so many migrants have passed through and many who have lost their lives. And so you see across the bottom, the 4 sort of elements of the immersion. We're humanizing the experience. We're coming to understand at a human level the experience of migration. We are there to accompany. This is not a service immersion, it's a learning immersion. And so we want to accompany the folks that we're in solidarity with in order to learn from them. And in the process, we're complicating the issue. So what we read about in the paper is not necessarily what is actually happening on the border. So we spend time talking with border ranchers who have sometimes a very different perspective on whether or not there should be walls and what the policies should look like. We talk with Border Patrol. That was probably one of the most challenging visits last year, was learning about Border Patrol's perspective on managing the border. We visited the Pima County Coroner's Office to learn about what happens when migrant remains are identified in the desert, and in the process of returning them and reuniting them with family. And so it's complicated, right? So we want to understand all the different aspects of that. And then we have to decide how to respond to it, because we've been given this gift of knowledge, of awareness, and understanding. And we want to be able to translate that into some sort of action. I don't know about you, but I cannot sit and watch injustice. I have to fight against injustice. And so, so the invitation that Kino has given us is one that calls us to action. And so this immersion has been running since 2019. It's been quite a journey, because that was right when, what do you call that thing? The pandemic started. So it's little bits and starts getting that thing going, but we're now running like rainwater. And so let's talk about the nuts and bolts of that immersion. So this is an overview. The course is called Deconstructing Community Development in Mexico, and this the focus of this particular immersion. There are other immersions that go to various parts in Mexico, but this particular section, section 1, is focused on migration justice. And so it's Humanities 3850, section 1, Deconstructing Community Development in Mexico. You can actually see it and register for it on My Seattle U or SU Online. The immersion itself runs from 15 to 21 December. So right after finals, basically, but ending before Christmas. And the $900 program fee is mostly a donation to the organization for their time. And it supports the programming that they provide based on the 3 tenets of their mission that I described earlier. Airfare is not included in that program, largely because of that time of year. Most students are going to be leaving right after final exams, and then they're probably going to be, so they're leaving from Seattle probably, but they might be returning somewhere else. If the folks that are coming back to Seattle, though, usually there's a good number of those. And so what we try to do is group travel to get lower rates for those folks. And so the course itself is a course that meets in fall quarter on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. And what that does is that prepares us for the experience. And then so there's 2 components to that. One is actually, I think that's on the next slide. So let me just say before we go to the next slide, one of the things we do is we spend time together in fall quarter, and I'll describe what that looks like in just a minute. Then we go on the immersion together, and at the end of the immersion, we decide what we want to do with the information and the knowledge and the awareness that we have. And then we make plans to engage with each other over winter or maybe spring quarter, working together to convert that knowledge to action. And so that's going to look like you individually deciding what it is you want to do. So as an example, I individually decided when I started this program is that I spend a month or 2 volunteering every year with Kino Border Initiative separately from this immersion experience. And then I also volunteer in an ELL classroom at Seattle Central College, which is just down the street. Most of those folks are migrants, and so I feel like I'm extending that reach. But everybody's making their own decisions about what works for them. Collectively, that could look like a lot of different things. You know, working for housing or migration justice. It could be letter writing campaigns to our senators and congressmen about different migration related legislation and that sort of thing. And then if you want to, you can take an independent study and receive additional academic credit for that advocacy and activism work that you would be doing. Other options for collective action might look like observing ICE deportation flights, attending Solidarity Days at the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma. There's vigils every week there. Food and clothing drives, like I said, ESL instruction, that sort of thing. And so whatever might work for you. And so this final slide is the course and credit options. And so what you see here, when you register for, if or when you register for the class, you have to actually choose the credit option. And so this particular course is what's called variable credit. And so what that means is you're sort of choosing your own adventure. And so what you see here is what the 3 credit options are about. And so it might be that you know a little bit about migration or migration justice. Maybe you took a class in high school or at community college, or you study it a lot on your own. and you're familiar with migration, immigration, and the border. And so you have somewhat of a working knowledge. So you could take one credit, and so then you'd be carrying, typically most students will carry 15 credits, and so you'd be taking 16 credits. And then so you would be meeting once every other week for 2 hours on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. And that would look like community buildings. And so you see these, the weekly meetings would be bi-weekly if you were taking one credit. And we would be focused on building connection among the participants in the immersion so that there's a level of familiarity and trust. And we do that through something called a story circle. And what that is in inviting each person to share a little bit about themselves, a sacred object that sort of shines a light into who they are and what it is that brings them into this space, into the shared space. Now, it might be that you want to know more about border or immigration or migration issues. And so you could choose the 2 or the 3 credit option. And what that's going to look like is a conversation that we could have to see where you might fit best. It might be you only have room for 1 credit, but you want to do some study on your own. That's fine. Or you could take, every student can take up to 18 credits for free without asking for special permission. And so you could take 3 credits if you wanted to. I particularly recommend that if you don't really have any background at all and you're interested in learning a little bit more. What that would look like is a weekly meeting. And we would have the story circles, but then we would also have discussion circles to develop our understanding of the historical and the current context. And there's a book called Voices of the Border, which I should have had ready to show you. But it's a book full of migrant stories that was written by Sister Ingracia, one of the staff of Kino Border Initiative, and a colleague of mine named Tovin Hansen at Oregon State University. And so that brings us to the end of our talkie. Thankfully, I didn't talk too long, but maybe more than you wanted me to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing, or I'm going to copy this so that we can put it in the chat. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to put this in the chat. And then send that. And then I guess what I would want to know is if you have any questions that I could answer for you.
Oh yeah, so for the travel fee, can I use my financial aid?
Right. So what happens when you register for the class, what'll happen is it will create, it'll put a program fee charge on your student account. And then whatever financial aid or other scholarships that you're receiving would pay for that, because most, not all, but most scholarships and financial aid cover courses and course fees.
How much do you think is going to be in total?
Well, it's the program fee is $900, and then the airfare that time of year, last year airfares were about $200 to $300. It sort of depends on how quickly you make you don't want to wait until like the week before to make the travel arrangements. We had one student that did that this past year for reasons that were beyond their control, and it was a little prohibitive, but turned out they had a family member that gave them a bunch of miles, and so it worked out well for them. But the other thing that we do is we get together and we decide if we can do some collective fundraising. So there's a program through the Education Abroad Office that offers some additional funding, and then there's a number of students that, we're all sort of in this, gee, it's really expensive to go here, how do we make all this work? And so there's some efforts to fundraise as well. And we sort of do that in the first week, whoever ends up signing up for the course, then we say, okay, how can we make this work for everybody? And then we work together, we take some collective action to try to help cover the program fees. But that's the other, the program fee, the airfare. And that's the other thing I think I'd mention is I talked about group travel. The vast majority of the folks are actually from the Seattle area, not always, but it depends on the airline. But a lot of airlines, if you have a certain number, like 4 or 5 or something like that, and they're all going to and from the same place on the same itinerary, you
Yeah.
can get cheaper group travel. And so we would want to, I'm real sensitive to that, you know, so typically at the first class meeting, we're talking about, all right, so who's going from and to where, so that we can try to get as cheap an airfare as possible for
No.
folks. Does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, that does. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Any other questions?
Oh no, yeah, I'm just worried about the money.
Yes, yes, I'm worried about the money too. So know that I want to work with you on that.
Yeah.
What I would recommend you do is you could talk to Student Financial Services before you register for the class, you know, and
Yeah.
say, hey, I'm going to take this class. I'm told it comes with a $900 program fee that gets charged to my account. How does that work with my financial aid?
Okay.
And then they should be able to tell you that specifically. And if you didn't write down the information on the actual class, they could look that up in the system, but it's called, I'm going to put it in the chat for you. It's called Humanities 3850. And they should be able to look that up in the system and see. I don't know if the program's fees been set. I think if the program's fees has been already been set up, but you know that there's a $900 program fee. And so you can ask them. I'm nearly positive the answer is going to be that it's covered by all of your scholarships and financial aid, but I don't want to steer you wrong. And so
Yeah.
I would definitely want you to look at that.
I will, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks for coming. And I hope it works out that you'll be able to register. It'd be fun to not only learn with you about this, I think, important issue, but also spend time investigating it in its own context there in Mexico.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Thank you then.
All right. Have a great day.
Okay, you too. Bye.
Bye. All right. So if you're watching this video and you're still not sure, or you got questions or something I can answer for you, I would invite you to reach out. My email is in the chat, but I'll also say it. Hudginsa, HUDGINSA @seattleu.edu. I'm generally responsive on email, and I hope that you'll consider joining me for this really important and life-changing, it's changed my life, experience exploring migration justice. Take good care. See you on campus in the fall.